The greatest devastation of my life came on that pitch-black day when I discovered the betrayal of my husband of 40 years, Harold. Never in my darkest imaginings could I have believed that the man with whom I had shared my years, my work, and my love had secretly built a second life, a second family, without my knowledge. This is the painful story of how the world of lies created by the man I trusted most, my husband Harold, was uncovered by a private investigator. Our marriage had always appeared to be the kind of peaceful home neighbors and relatives admired, a place where we raised two wonderful children, where everything seemed serene and enviable. And within that illusion of happiness, I took pride in my loyalty to Harold. But lately, a chilling distance had begun to grow in his behavior, an unease that settled deep within me. Those never-ending work meetings he constantly used as an excuse, the phone he clutched obsessively and hid from me every time he returned home. They planted a seed of suspicion I couldn't quite name. At night, as I stared at the empty side of the bed, I spent hours wondering why Harold had grown so foreign to me, why the warmth between us had vanished. Yet I could never find a sensible answer, because I refused to believe he could betray me. When I finally realized I could no longer live with this uncertainty, I made the most humiliating yet most necessary decision of my life, and without telling even my children, I contacted a private investigator I had found online. The moment I handed over my husband's photograph in that dimly lit office, my only hope was that my suspicions would turn out to be unfounded, that Harold was distant simply because of work stress. I had no idea that the truth awaiting me would shatter my life completely. After telling the investigator everything I knew, Harold's strange routines over the past months, the business trips he clearly fabricated, I stepped out of that cold office building with a mix of desperation to learn the truth and a crushing fear of what I might discover. Because I felt with every fiber of my being that this irreversible step could trigger an earthquake powerful enough to destroy the foundations of our 40-year marriage. The days that followed became the longest and most agonizing wait of my life. Every time I looked at Harold's face, I battled a terrible guilt for secretly having him followed. Yet I couldn't silence the doubts gnawing at me like a relentless parasite, keeping me awake night after night. The investigator had demanded absolute patience. He warned me repeatedly that he needed time to track Harold's movements without raising suspicion, documenting who he met, analyzing suspicious financial patterns, and that a single rushed action could jeopardize everything. After exactly a week, while I was preparing dinner, my heart nearly leapt out of my chest when I saw "private number" appear on my phone screen. It was the investigator, and the seriousness in his voice immediately told me that what he had found was far from the innocent work delays I had wished for. The next day, in the small cafe where we met, he handed me an envelope. The very first photographs showed my husband standing at the door of a detached house in a part of town I had never even heard of, somewhere far outside the city. According to the investigator, these visits matched exactly with the times Harold had claimed to be on urgent work trips. The other photographs that slid out of the envelope were like daggers driven straight into my heart. My husband of 40 years, Harold, was holding hands in a quiet park with a woman far younger than me, a complete stranger, smiling with a joy I hadn't seen on his face in decades, as if the rest of the world no longer existed. As I stared at the teacup sitting on the table, I wished with all my being that what I had just seen was nothing but a nightmare, when I would wake from any second to find everything as it once was. But the brutal clarity of the photographs hit me again and again, reminding me that this betrayal wasn't imagination. It was a vile truth Harold had kept hidden from me. When the investigator told me he had looked into the woman's identity, that her name was Sophie, and that Harold had rented that house under her name a year ago, my ears began to ring. A full year of systematic lies. Every business trip, every late meeting I had foolishly believed was suddenly stripped of any meaning. Just when I thought the betrayal could not be any worse, the investigator slid one final photograph across the table and said, "Prepare yourself, Mrs. Norris. This isn't the worst of it." My blood ran cold. In that picture, standing beside Harold and Sophie, was a small boy who clung to them with a joyful innocence. And that child was undeniable proof of a second family I had never known existed. I don't remember how I got up from my seat or how I left the cafe trembling without saying a single word to the investigator. All I remember is the way 40 years of marriage, thousands of memories, crumbled into dust because of that one single photograph. When I stepped outside, the noise of the city turned into a dull, distant hum. It felt as though I was trapped inside a glass dome. The rushing people, the blaring horns, all of it seemed meaningless, unreal. My mind saw only that sickening image, Harold gently patting the child's head, and the horrifying truth the man I had shared a lifetime with had hidden not just an affair from me, but an entire family. Hours later, when my feet finally carried me back to our home, the same path I had walked for decades, I unlocked the door and stepped inside. Suddenly, the living room where we'd spent years, the sofa we'd chosen together, every corner filled with the memories I thought we shared, all of it felt cold, foreign, and staged, like a set built for a play I foolishly believed to be real. I realized then that the happiness I had treasured was nothing more than the performance of a master liar. My eyes caught the large family portrait hanging on the wall, the one from our children's graduation day, where we all smiled with what I now knew was hollow pride. A sharp pain twisted in my stomach, knowing that behind Harold's fatherly smile lay the love for another child he had hidden. Realizing that my beloved children had been deceived for years by the man they adored, it created a heavy, suffocating mixture of grief and rage within me. As the numbing shock slowly faded, practical yet devastating questions surged into my mind. The rent for that separate house, the endless expenses of the woman he was seeing, and most of all, the needs of that young boy. Where had the money come from? I finally understood. Every penny Harold had withheld from me and our children under the excuse of times are tight, the pension isn't enough, had been used to fund this secret family. What belonged to us had been stolen. I don't know how long I sat on that sofa, but when the sun finally set and darkness filled the room, my tears were gone, replaced by an icy, unshakable calm. The crying, naive woman was gone. In her place stood someone else, someone who had endured the greatest betrayal of her life and would not crumble. A woman ready to reclaim every bit of what belonged to her and her children, from that lying man and his mistress, down to the very last penny. I don't know how long I sat motionless in the suffocating darkness of our home, but when the storm inside me finally settled into an icy determination, I reached for my phone because I knew this betrayal wasn't just emotional. There was a financial crime buried beneath it. My children and I had been robbed, and it was time to begin the second phase with the investigator, a full financial investigation. During our call, I told the investigator that this had gone far beyond an ordinary affair. I instructed him clearly and firmly to uncover every financial source feeding Harold's second family, any hidden bank accounts, income streams outside his pension, and most importantly, exactly how much of the inheritance meant for me and our children had been funneled into this illegitimate relationship, down to the last penny. The moment I hung up, I heard the familiar sound of the front door opening at the exact time it usually did. My heart thudded violently, yet I forced myself to wear the same empty welcome home mask I'd put on for years. I couldn't allow the volcanic rage inside me to erupt. Not until the day I confronted this deceitful man with undeniable evidence. As Harold sat at the kitchen table, eating his dinner as if he were an innocent man returning from a harmless day, the only thought running through my mind was how I would make him pay for this betrayal through the legal system, with every tool the law allowed. I dug my nails into my palms as I watched him, trying to suppress the growing desire for justice that burned inside me. Later that night, as I looked at the stranger sleeping peacefully beside me, this two-faced liar, I realized that I no longer felt pain or sorrow. Only a cold pursuit of justice remained. This quiet house, this shared bed, had become the silent front line of a war that was about to begin, and I vowed that I would collect every piece of evidence necessary to win. The next morning, having to wake up and prepare breakfast for the deceitful man lying beside me, just as I'd done every morning for decades, filled me with a disgust that seemed to seep into my bones. But for this plan to succeed, I had to behave exactly as if we were still living our long, harmonious marriage. The mask could never slip. Whenever Harold slipped on his jacket and said, "I might be late again tonight," the weight of the lie beneath those words almost crushed me. But I had learned not to let my fury take control. Instead, I engraved every excuse, every movement into my memory, knowing they would become critical evidence in the divorce case I planned to file. While the investigator worked on uncovering the financial records, I didn't stay idle. I began searching through our shared property deeds, pension documents, and even the old bank books Harold kept locked away, because I knew perfectly well that maintaining a second family required large sums of money that had to come from somewhere within our shared finances. When I found a tiny key hidden in an old rusty chest Harold had abandoned 20 years ago, a strange excitement surged through me. My hands trembled. As I unlocked the drawer, instead of deeds or pension paperwork, I found a small, worn notebook with Sophie's name written inside it, along with an address. Seeing the dates marked inside, the woman's birthday, the little boy's birth date, and other important appointments, made my stomach twist. It meant Harold hadn't been living this parallel life for a single year, but for far longer, carefully, methodically. This wasn't a momentary lapse or a fleeting mistake. It was a conscious, calculated betrayal, a web of lies spun over many, many years. When I aligned the dates from Harold's hidden notebook with the information the investigator had previously given me, everything fell into place with horrifying clarity. I realized that all those supposedly innocent business trips over the years had actually been stolen moments, time my husband spent with his mistress and their illegitimate son, taken directly from me and our children. The rage inside me surged to a level I could barely contain. Using the notebook as a guide, I began digging through Harold's old phone bills and credit card statements from the past 5 years. I knew maintaining a parallel life required significant money, and I carefully documented every suspicious expense. Entries labeled travel or gifts or foreign services, building an unmistakable map of financial misconduct. Just as I expected, right in the middle of one statement was a large transfer from our joint savings account with the note housing deposit. When I saw it, my breath caught. That money was meant for the country house Harold and I had dreamed of retiring in, our peaceful old age plan. And now that dream had been hijacked to build a home for someone else. In that moment, the sharp sting of heartbreak turned into a cold, calculated fury. I whispered to myself that I wouldn't merely divorce Harold. I would ensure he paid dearly for every pound he stole, that every penny funneled into that woman and her child would be clawed back, and that he would be left financially ruined by the very lies he created. As I gathered all the evidence, those vile photographs, the statements, the notebook entries, and sealed them into a thick envelope, I knew I was no longer just holding the story of a broken heart. I was holding proof of a serious financial fraud. This envelope wasn't just paper. It was the first and most crucial step toward my freedom and justice. The next morning, I clutched the envelope to my chest as if it were treasure and made my way to the investigator's office. This envelope didn't just contain the proof of Harold's betrayal. It carried the power of reclaiming 40 years of deception. For the first time, fear loosened its grip on me, replaced by a fierce hunger for justice. When I laid out everything before the investigator, from Sophie's notebook to the receipt for the housing deposit taken from our joint account, I could see the shock flicker across his face, despite his attempt to remain professional. He understood at once that Harold hadn't simply indulged in a forbidden romance. He had systematically siphoned off our family's savings. The investigator said these financial documents would give us overwhelming leverage in the divorce case. There was almost no way Harold could justify these expenses legally, meaning every penny he had channeled into his second family could be recovered. Justice, he explained, would not only be emotional, it would be financial and complete. But as we planned the legal strategy, one thought gnawed at my heart more painfully than anything else. How would I tell my children? The knowledge that their father had committed such a monumental betrayal would devastate them. This was the hardest battlefield of all, the moral one. Together, the investigator and I decided that until every asset of Harold's was identified and every legal step prepared, I would continue pretending at home, maintaining the same daily facade. The final blow had to be delivered at the perfect moment, when I was strongest and Harold was least prepared. Die Zeit des Wartens nach dem Gespräch mit dem Detektiv verwandelte sich in den schwersten psychologischen Kampf meines Lebens. Jeder Moment, in dem ich auf Hans' Lügen reagieren, seine falschen Lächeln erwidern und die Maske aufrecht erhalten musste, die meine wahre Verletzlichkeit verbarg, zerrte immer mehr an meinen Kräften.
Und dann, gerade als alles nach Plan lief, kam der härteste Test. An einem Sonntagabend sagte Hans plötzlich, er habe unsere Kinder und Enkel zum gemeinsamen Abendessen eingeladen. Für ihn war es ein gewöhnliches Familientreffen, für mich jedoch eine Bühne, auf der ich die größte schauspielerische Leistung meines Lebens erbringen musste. Ich war die Einzige im Raum, die wusste, welch gigantische Lüge dieser Mann lebte. Am Tisch, unter den unschuldigen Blicken unserer Kinder und Enkel, musste ich die Rolle der liebenden, treuen Ehefrau spielen. Ich lächelte, redete, nickte, als wüsste ich nichts. Doch innerlich fühlte ich mich wie ein Monster, das sein eigenes Gift herunterwirkt, um nicht lauthals zu schreien, während der Mann an meiner Seite gleichzeitig 2 Familien führte. Während Hans unseren Kindern von seinen beruflichen Erfolgen erzählte und davon sprach, wie sehr ihm Familie bedeute, liefen in meinem Kopf ununterbrochen die Fotos des Detektivs ab. Zu sehen, wie dieser zweigesichtige Mann einerseits Zuneigung zur eigenen Familie vortäuschte und andererseits mit unserem gestohlenen Geld ein zweites Leben finanzierte, brachte meinen Ekel auf den Höhepunkt. Als alle gegangen waren und das Haus wieder in die eisige Stille fiel, stand ich inmitten schmutzigen Geschirrs und spürte, welchen Preis ich für diese große Vorstellung gezahlt hatte. Doch ich hatte die Probe bestanden, ein Zeichen, dass mein Plan funktionierte. Bis der Tag der Enthüllung kam, musste ich durchhalten. Ich schwor mir, die Maske zu tragen, bis sie mir selbst vom Gesicht fiel. Einige Tage später, während ich morgens im Haus beschäftigt war, klingelte plötzlich mein Telefon. Die Diktei stand auf dem Display. In diesem Moment wusste ich, dass das Warten vorbei war. Der ernste Ton in der Stimme des Detektivs verriet mir sofort, dass die gefundenen finanziellen Unterlagen von enormer Bedeutung waren und dass Hans Verrat noch viel größer war, als ich angenommen hatte. Als ich im Büro des Detektivs ankam, lagen dort mehrere dicke Ordner voller Dokumente. Jede Seite ein weiterer Beweis für Hans' Lügen. Es war nicht nur eine emotionale Untreue gewesen, es war ein ausgeklügelter, langfristiger Betrug. Er hatte nicht nur ein Haus für Selina finanziert, sondern auch regelmäßig kleinere Summen aus der Buchhaltung seiner Firma abgezweigt. Der Betrag, den der Detektiv mir zeigte, traf mich wie ein Schlag. Rund 80.000 Euro. Geld, das Hans und ich in den letzten 10 Jahren für die Zukunft unserer Kinder angespart hatten, waren in Selinas Lebenshaltungskosten und die Ausbildung des unehelichen Kindes geflossen. Es war der unwiderlegbare Beweis, dass Hans nicht nur mich, sondern auch unsere Kinder um ihr Erbe betrogen hatte. Der Detektiv bestätigte, dass diese finanziellen Unterlagen ausreichten, um Hans' gesamtes Vermögen rechtlich einfrieren zu lassen und den gestohlenen Betrag im Scheidungsverfahren mitsamt Zinsen zurückzufordern. Es gab keine Möglichkeit mehr für ihn, etwas davon glaubwürdig abzustreiten. Ich erklärte, dass es nun keinen Grund mehr gab zu warten. Der juristische Prozess musste sofort eingeleitet werden. Doch ich bestand darauf, Hans selbst zu konfrontieren. Nicht heimlich, nicht im Stillen, sondern vor unseren Kindern mit den offiziellen Dokumenten in der Hand. Denn das würde der Moment sein, in dem mein jahrelanger Schmerz sich in gerechte Vergeltung verwandelte und ich wollte jede Sekunde davon selbst erleben.
Right after leaving the investigator's office, I took the first step of the plan I had carefully crafted in my mind. I invited my children to dinner under the pretext of an urgent family meeting. I refused to let this horrific truth remain only between Harold and me. Our children deserved to know the full extent of the lie that had poisoned our family. As I spoke to them on the phone, even I could hardly believe how calm and natural my voice sounded. I told them we needed to discuss an important legal matter, something about inheritance and property, and that their father would be present as well. This way, Harold would assume the gathering was purely administrative and suspect nothing. I then phoned the investigator again and informed him the confrontation would take place the following evening at precisely 8 o'clock during dinner. I instructed him to have the solicitors initiate the legal orders at that exact moment to freeze all Harold's accounts and assets. His punishment needed to strike all at once, emotionally and financially. While setting the table, I hid the envelope containing all the evidence in the bottom drawer of the sideboard, right near Harold's seat. It was a time bomb waiting to explode, and when the moment came, I would lay every shred of his betrayal on the table in front of our children. That night, as I lay beside Harold while he slept peacefully, oblivious to everything, I felt neither pity nor regret. All I could think of was the justice that tomorrow would bring. After 40 years of deception, the end was near. And for me, that end meant a powerful new beginning. When I woke the next morning, even the sky seemed to reflect the storm roaring inside me. As I prepared breakfast, I watched Harold calmly reading his newspaper, completely unaware of the shock he would face within hours. The knowledge gave me a strange sense of strength. Harold questioned why I had suddenly summoned the children for dinner, insisting that property matters weren't so urgent. And I met his condescending expression with silence. Watching him walk straight into the trap he had built with his own lies confirmed just how flawlessly my plan was unfolding. Later in the afternoon, when my children stepped through the door, a pang of sorrow surged through me. What they were about to learn would change their lives forever. Hugging them, I felt the weight of what I was about to do, the emotional cost of this long and painful plan. When we finally sat down at the table, time seemed to freeze. Every second felt like an eternity. At 10 to 8, knowing the solicitors were filing the court documents at that very moment, my body went cold. The confrontation was almost here. I could feel it in every part of me. And when the clock struck exactly 8, strengthened by the knowledge that the legal process had begun, I turned to everyone at the table and said that we would not be discussing property matters after all, but something far more serious, far more devastating. That moment marked the end of Harold's 40-year deception and the beginning of justice. And they stood with justice. When I said a far more serious and devastating matter, a brief look of shock crossed everyone's face at the table, but on Harold's face, that confusion transformed rapidly into anger and a deep, unmistakable dread. He instantly realized that this was not about property paperwork at all. He sensed that something far darker was coming, something capable of collapsing the empire of lies he had built for years. Harold shoved his plate aside and shot to his feet, shouting, "Eleanor, stop this nonsense! Where are the documents? Don't create drama in front of the children!" His aggressive, controlling tone echoed through the room, but I remained perfectly still. I kept my voice calm, my gaze cold and unwavering. His intimidation no longer had any power over me. I took a sip of water, steadied my voice, and then, clearly enough for my children to hear, told him that his lies were finished. I explained that while he believed tonight's dinner was about property issues, I had in fact hired a private investigator months ago, and every secret he thought he had hidden was now known. The instant Harold heard the words private investigator, his face turned ghost white. The smug, dismissive expression he wore for years vanished, replaced by raw panic. Seeing that fear, seeing him caught utterly unprepared, was a moment I had waited for longer than I cared to admit. Before he could deny anything or invent new lies, I turned away from the shocked faces at the table and walked toward the sideboard where the evidence was hidden. The moment had come for silence to end and the truth to speak for itself. As I moved, Harold cried out, "Eleanor, stop! Don't do this!" His voice cracked with desperation, but with our children watching, he had no choice but to stay seated and pretend he still had control of the situation, even though control had already slipped through his fingers. I opened the drawer, and my hand closed around the thick brown envelope containing 40 years of betrayal. The cold touch of it reminded me that justice was no longer abstract. It was here, in my hands. My fingers trembled, but my posture remained firm as I turned back to the table. The first thing I drew from the envelope was the set of photographs, the one showing Harold smiling joyfully with his other family. When I placed them on the table, my children's expression shifted from confusion to shock, and then to a profound, heartbreaking disappointment. When Harold saw the photos, he collapsed back into his chair. His voice shrank into a pitiful whisper. This is fabricated. Don't believe it." But I could see in my children's eyes that they already knew the truth. His words had no weight anymore. Watching their respect and trust for their father crumble within seconds pierced me deeply. But then one of my children turned away from him in anger, while the other reached for my hand with a firm, reassuring grip. In that moment, I realized I was not fighting this battle alone. My children stood with me.
At the very moment Harold muttered, "Lies, all lies," I knew his words carried no weight anymore. So I pulled out the real evidence, the housing deposit receipts taken from our joint savings account and the tenancy agreement for the house he had rented in Sophie's name. I spread them across the center of the table. These were not signs of a fleeting affair. They were proof of a theft that had stolen directly from our children's future. I explained to my children that more than 20,000 pounds of our savings, money Harold had claimed he couldn't spare during the years he repeated, "Times are tight," had in fact been used to set up a home for his mistress and pay for the expenses of his illegitimate child. The cost of his lies was not only my life, but the entire financial security we had built for our family. When Harold saw the financial documents, his panic peaked. He began pleading, "Please, kids, this was a mistake. Your mother is exaggerating. I'll pay everything back." But the empty remorse spilling from his mouth contradicted every lie he had been living for years. The disappointment in my children's eyes told me there was no turning back. I cut through his excuses coldly. "You can explain your mistake to your solicitors, because right at this moment, while we sit here, your bank accounts and assets are being legally frozen." The color drained completely from his face. And when his phone buzzed and the screen displayed a notification from his bank confirming the freeze order, he finally understood.
The phone slipped from his trembling hands and clattered onto the table, the clearest signal that his life, his wealth, and his lies had all just been halted by the law. That sound had barely faded when his panic snapped into blind rage. He slammed his fist onto the table and shouted, "How dare you do this to me? This is my home. How could you trap your own husband like this?" Without a single change in my expression, I pointed at the documents and replied, "I set no trap. You sabotaged our 40-year marriage. I'm only reclaiming what is mine and what you stole from our children." My voice was steady, icy, and final. The era of his lies was over. Then one of our children stood up, shaking with anger, and said to him, "Dad, you lied to Mom for years. You stole our future to build another life, and now you're pretending you're the victim?" Hearing my child defend the truth so fiercely was the greatest victory of this brutal battle. Their strength eased the agony inside me more than anything else could. I then opened the drawer and took out a small bag I had prepared beforehand. I placed a few of Harold's belongings inside and pointed toward the door. "You no longer have the right to stay in this house. The legal process has begun. Go live in the home you built with your lies." With our children turning their backs on him, and with the shock of his frozen assets weighing heavily on his shoulders, Harold finally realized he could not fight anymore. He took the small bag silently, walked to the door, and stepped out of the house. And just like that, at exactly 8 o'clock, a 40-year lie ended right before our children's eyes, brought down by my own hands.
The moment Harold walked out of the door in shame, a heavy silence settled over the house, so dense and suffocating that even the ticking of the wall clock seemed muted beneath it. That silence was the echo of a 40-year lie collapsing. And as I looked at the scattered evidence on the table, I felt deep in my soul that not only my life, but my children's lives too had finally begun to free themselves from Harold's betrayal. When my children finally processed the reality of their father's emotional infidelity and financial theft, the sound of their choked sobs pierced my heart. In that instant, every ounce of revenge inside me melted into pure maternal compassion. I held them close and whispered, "Everything will get better from now on. We will get through this together, and we will reclaim every penny your father stole by law." After calming them, I quietly gathered the crumbs, the photographs, and the financial records from the table. That simple act of cleaning was not just tidying up. It felt like sweeping away the last remnants of Harold's deceit from our home. It marked the beginning of something new, and for the first time in years, it brought peace to my spirit. Despite everything that had happened, I realized the bond between my children and me had grown stronger than ever. We were no longer just a mother and her children. We were a united front, sharing the same pain and the same pursuit of justice. We had become a team prepared to stand shoulder to shoulder against their father's betrayal. That night, when I lay in bed and felt the empty space beside me for the first time in 40 years, the emptiness did not bring loneliness or sorrow. It brought a profound sense of freedom. No shadow of lies, no weight of false promises. That first night alone marked the beginning of a new chapter, my second spring, the dawn of true justice. The following day, with my children's emotional support, I took the thick envelope of evidence and went to the solicitor's office.
I explained every detail of Harold's financial fraud and personal betrayal and signed the papers to initiate both the divorce and the claim for the stolen funds. That signature was not just the start of a legal process. It was my declaration of independence, breaking the 40-year chain of deceit. Our solicitor emphasized the strength of our evidence, the photographs proving Harold's second family, and the bank receipts showing the large withdrawals from our joint account. With evidence this concrete, the solicitor confirmed Harold had virtually no chance of denying anything in court, and he would almost certainly suffer severe financial consequences. During our meeting, Harold repeatedly called my mobile. I could easily guess why. He must have discovered that his accounts were frozen, that his assets were under restriction, and that his property transactions had been halted. In a panic, he was now desperately trying to plead and negotiate without a solicitor. I ignored every call. I told my solicitor firmly that I would not respond to any of Harold's attempts to contact me, and that from now on, all communication had to go through legal channels. I refused to be dragged into emotional arguments. The language of justice would be my only response to 40 years of lies. When I left the solicitor's office, I felt Harold's dark shadow slowly lifting from my life. A great burden had finally fallen away. It was time to direct my energy not toward the past, but toward building a peaceful, honorable future with my children. The greatest battle of my life was nearing its end, and I was walking out of it victorious. Once the case became public, whispers began circulating among neighbors and old acquaintances. People wondered how a 40-year marriage could end in such a scandal, with frozen assets and legal battles. But I held my head high, answering their curious looks with quiet dignity, knowing I was simply pursuing justice and confronting the consequences of Harold's betrayal. When Harold realized he could no longer reach me, he began pleading with our children, trying to use them as intermediaries. In the messages they showed me, he wrote things like, "Your mother is exaggerating. I'll pay everything back. Please talk to her. Save me from this embarrassment." Watching him sink to such desperation revealed just how low he had fallen and how weak his character truly was. My children immediately rejected his manipulative attempts. They hugged me tightly and said, "Mom, you're doing the right thing. We don't care about the money he took. We care about the injustice you suffered. We're with you." Their support was worth more to me than any legal victory. It gave me the emotional strength to continue this difficult fight. A few days later, when I received Harold's first official settlement offer through my solicitor, it became painfully clear how terrified he was. He offered to return only a portion of the stolen money in exchange for my giving up all legal claims. The audacity of such a pathetic offer made me laugh bitterly. I told my solicitor firmly that under no circumstances would we accept. Harold would pay back not only the £20,000 he had stolen, but also the legal fees and any court-ordered compensation. I would not back down until he paid the full price of the lies he built his life upon. This was not about money. This was about justice and restoring my dignity. After rejecting Harold's insulting offer, my solicitor immediately launched a counterattack, requesting a full investigation into the ownership records of the house Harold had transferred into Sophie's name. If it could be proven that he bought it with stolen funds from our joint savings, It would constitute fraudulent activity and give us enormous leverage. The property documents arrived quickly. Seeing that the house purchase price matched exactly with the housing deposit withdrawn from our account, confirmed beyond all doubt how calculated Harold's deception had been. And it proved something more. Sophie herself had knowingly benefited from an illegal, deceitful transaction. I instructed my solicitor to begin proceedings to nullify the fraudulent property transfer immediately and to have the house placed under legal restriction until every penny was recovered. That home was built with our stolen money. There was no reason it should remain untouched. Shortly after, an official notice was delivered to Sophie, informing her that we were aware of Harold's fraudulent actions and that the ownership of the house was now legally disputed. I knew this would send her into panic and that her fear would only intensify the pressure on Harold, pushing him closer to a forced settlement. Watching the slow but steady march of justice unfold against Harold's lies and financial crimes eased the pain that had sat inside me for 40 years. This battle was no longer just about ending a marriage. It was about reclaiming my honor, restoring my family's dignity, and ensuring that every part of the life Harold built on deceit crumbled under the weight of the truth.
The moment the legal notice reached Harold's mistress, Sophie, it wasn't hard to imagine the chaos erupting inside the second home he had built. The illusion of peace he had created, using money stolen from me, had begun to collapse. Their financial security was gone, and so was the trust she had placed in him. All night long, according to the messages my children later showed me, Sophie was crying on the phone. "We're going to lose the house. What are we going to do now?" The next morning, despite strict instructions from the solicitors, the doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw Harold, disheveled, unshaven, and looking utterly desperate. His panic had driven him to break every legal boundary and come straight to my doorstep. Standing there, stripped of all dignity, he begged for a chance to talk, hoping I might give up the case. I didn't open the door. Through the thick wood, I said firmly, "I have nothing left to say to you. You ended our 40-year marriage and you stole from our children. From now on, every matter between us will be handled through solicitors and courts. The laws you ignored will now decide your fate." I heard his breathing falter on the other side. When he finally walked away defeated, I felt the weight of his shadow lifting. And I hoped Sophie realized that the life she had accepted, knowingly or not, was built on stolen money and lies, and that she too would face the consequences of this fraudulent world she had stepped into. Even though Harold's desperate begging brought a fleeting sense of satisfaction, I reminded myself that my fight was not about revenge, but dignity, about reclaiming what belonged to my children and me. I instructed my solicitors to accelerate every step of the process and to leave Harold no room to fabricate new lies or delay the proceedings. Soon after, my solicitor called to inform me that the court had set the first hearing date for both the divorce and the financial claims. After 6 tense months, things were finally moving towards a decisive conclusion. This wasn't just a private matter anymore. It was about to be judged within the formal walls of the British legal system. I took a deep breath, ready for the final confrontation.
knowing Harold was drowning in financial turmoil, his accounts frozen, the house under dispute, and his mistress furious, confirmed that justice was unfolding with cold precision. He was being punished not only emotionally, but also through the very thing he valued most, money. I could feel that he was finally beginning to pay the price for his decades of deceit. Throughout this process, my children remained my greatest strength. Despite the betrayal committed by their father, they stood firmly beside me. Their unwavering support became a shield no lie or manipulation could ever pierce. As the court date approached, I knew I would eventually have to face Harold in the courtroom one last time. My solicitor warned me that it would be emotionally challenging, but I promised myself that I would stand tall. I would show not only the judge, but Harold himself, how one confronts a 40-year lie with dignity and unwavering resolve. During my final call with my solicitor, I made one thing absolutely clear. I wasn't only seeking to recover the 20,000 pounds he had stolen and the divorce decree. I wanted the highest possible compensation for emotional damage as well. I wanted the full weight of his immoral actions reflected in the judgment. Every penny he owed me, financially, morally, emotionally, would be accounted for. On the morning of the hearing, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. A cold, steady calm, as if the entire weight of my 40-year past had finally lifted from my shoulders. It felt like I was walking toward the final and most decisive front of a long and grueling war, knowing that justice would finally be served and that Harold would confront the full extent of his betrayal and financial fraud. I dressed in the most elegant, dignified outfit I owned, one that reflected my self-respect and unwavering resolve. As I made my way toward the courthouse, the presence of my children beside me washed away every trace of last-minute anxiety. Every step reminded me of how justified, how honorable my purpose was. The thick envelope of evidence in my hand, once a source of deep pain and humiliation, had now become my strongest and sharpest sword of justice. The thought made me smile with renewed strength. Standing in the courthouse's dim, heavy corridors with my solicitor, I couldn't help but notice that, unlike the other anxious parties waiting for their cases, I felt an extraordinary sense of peace. Unlike many women who faced betrayal with only their word against their husbands, I had undeniable, irrefutable financial evidence, and that gave me a confidence no one could shake. When Harold walked through the door, I saw at once what his lies had done to him. The arrogant, dismissive expression he once wore had vanished, replaced by fear, shame, and complete defeat. And in the brief moment our eyes met, the way he looked away from me was a silent, involuntary confession of guilt. That single fleeting gesture gave me all the strength I needed. I turned to my solicitor and said, "Don't worry, the evidence is more than enough for him to answer for every immoral and fraudulent act. All I need now is for justice to be delivered." The moment had arrived. 40 years of lies were about to be exposed under the sharp light of the law, and my life would begin anew, stripped of deception and strengthened by truth. When my solicitor gently pushed open the enormous oak doors of the courtroom, the cold marble floors and imposing high ceilings made one thing perfectly clear. My private heartbreak was no longer just my own. It was now being weighed and judged under the authority of the state, by the strict, impartial rules of the law. Gathering all my resolve, I walked into the chamber like a woman reclaiming her honor. Across the room, under the harsh courtroom lighting, Harold looked utterly broken. The facade he had built, the false stability, the fabricated trust had crumbled. He sat slumped, barely able to listen to his solicitor's whispered instructions, the weight of his years of deceit visibly crushing him. When my solicitor pulled from the evidence folder the photo of Harold with his mistress and illegitimate child and formally handed it to the judge, a deep, undeniable shame spread across Harold's face. His shoulders collapsed and he shut his eyes tightly, unable to endure the humiliation of having his infidelity exposed in a solemn setting of a courtroom. To me, this was the first solid, undeniable victory of justice. As I watched the judge study the photograph and then examine the bank statements with grave seriousness, not once did I feel regret. After 40 years of loyalty repaid with lies, this was the only rightful outcome. Ensuring Harold and his mistress returned every penny they had taken and ensuring their fraudulently obtained assets were reclaimed was the only way to restore my dignity and safeguard my children's future. Justice was finally unfolding, not in shadows, not behind closed doors, but under the full authority of the law. As the judge examined the evidence, those damning photographs proving Harold's emotional betrayal, and the bank records showing how he funneled our joint savings into Sophie's home, the atmosphere in the courtroom became impossibly heavy. Even the sound of someone swallowing echoed like thunder. It was clear. The sword of justice had finally been drawn. After studying the overwhelming pile of evidence, Harold's solicitor, looking nearly as defeated as his client, rose to speak. He mumbled something about an emotional void and a moment of weakness. His excuses were flimsy, hollow, and painfully irrelevant in the face of such ironclad proof. It was obvious even he no longer believed in Harold's innocence. As soon as his weak defense ended, my solicitor stepped forward with unwavering precision. In a firm, resonant voice, he stated that Harold's actions were far more than an emotional lapse. They constituted deliberate asset diversion and breach of trust, crimes with legal consequences. He stressed that this conduct shattered the foundational trust of a 40-year marriage, and that every stolen pound must be returned with full compensation. From where I stood, I could see my children in the corner of the courtroom, their eyes glistening as their father's betrayal was laid bare before the court. Yet their posture remained strong, their heads held high. That moment, a moment where their loyalty to truth outweighed their grief, was the most meaningful emotional victory I could have asked for. Once all arguments were presented, the judge paused. With a pen in hand, he glanced at me over his glasses and asked me, "Mrs. Norris, do you believe your husband feels any genuine remorse for his actions?" Without hesitation, I replied, "If he felt remorse, he wouldn't have presented a false defense with his solicitor, and he would have returned the stolen money long ago. He is not remorseful, only caught." My words echoed through the silent courtroom. As we stepped outside the courtroom, my children immediately threw their arms around me,
tears shining in their eyes as they whispered, "You did it, Mum." In that moment, every ounce of pain from 40 years of betrayal was washed away, replaced by a peace and sense of justice that words could never fully capture. This victory wasn't just mine, it was the triumph of our entire family, a testament to our collective fight for integrity and honor. Walking down the cold marble steps of the courthouse into the bright sunlight, I felt, for the first time in my life, the immense weight of Harold's lies and deceptions lifting off my shoulders entirely. This was more than the freedom that came with a divorce. It was the official restoration of my dignity and the rights stolen from my children. The very next day, my solicitor handed me the documents confirming that the legal procedures had begun. The fraudulent property Harold had transferred to Sophie was being repossessed, and the frozen funds, along with full interest, would be transferred back into my account. It was undeniable proof that the second life Harold had built was falling apart piece by piece. That evening, as I sat in the kitchen with my children drinking tea and quiet peace, I felt the entire house transform. The shadows of lies and betrayal that once filled its corners had vanished. For the first time in decades, this home felt pure again, a place of honesty, love, and dignity. And my determination to build a new, honorable life with my children grew even stronger. Before going to bed, I picked up an old wedding photograph from my bedside table, one that had once symbolized hope, but had long since become a reminder of deception. Without hesitation, I cast it into the bin. It was a symbolic farewell, a final declaration that I would now look only toward the future, illuminated by justice and the love of my children. Thanks to the meticulous work of my solicitors following the final ruling, the entire £20,000 Harold had stolen, plus the court-awarded compensation and statutory interest, was deposited into my bank account within days. It wasn't just the return of money, it was the full restoration of my dignity, the correction of a 40-year injustice, and the reclaiming of every penny stolen from my children's future. In the end, the fraudulent property Harold had bought for Sophie was officially revoked, and the ownership transferred back as per court order. Sophie, clutching her child's hand and dragging her suitcases behind her, was forced to leave the home built on stolen money. Watching her walk away in defeat was a powerful reminder that no happiness, no household, no illusion built on lies and theft can ever last. Justice always arrives, unexpected, unstoppable, undeniable. As for Harold, once all his assets were seized and the compensation paid, he found himself with nothing. Neither his mistress, nor his former social circle, nor even his own children could stand by him. He was left financially ruined, socially isolated, and trapped in the ashes of his own lies. A man condemned to a life stripped of the arrogance he once flaunted. The money I recovered was used not for my comfort, but for my children and grandchildren, because it had always been theirs, stolen from them long before they ever knew it existed. Using it to secure their futures filled me with indescribable peace, knowing it now served a pure and rightful purpose. My story stands as proof that even at 80 years old, a woman can defend her honor, protect her rights, and fight for her children's future even after suffering the greatest betrayal from the person she trusted most. Never forget,
No life built on lies can endure. Justice will always prevail, so long as one stands firmly in truth, fights with determination, and holds tightly to the moral strength that comes from being right.